Hello again, everybody, and Roll Tide. This is Roger Hoover. Glad to welcome you back to the Crimson Tide Sports Network on this Tuesday edition of Crimson Drive, driven by Tuscaloosa Toyota. Check them out online at TuscaloosaToyota.com, as we're excited to be with you for the first of two shows coming up this week to get you ready for Alabama against Georgia in the 2021 SEC Championship game in Atlanta. As we start the show, we will go through our headlines that are always presented by our friends at RJ Young. They provided us with this smart board to go through all of the different headlines for today. And remember, RJ Young is the official technology solutions provider of Crimson Drive. We'll start with a look at what's coming up on the show today. And have you caught your breath yet from the Iron Bowl? What a crazy Saturday night down in the plains at Auburn. We will take a look back with all the radio highlights from that game, as Alabama only scored its first touchdown with 24 seconds left to go in the ball game. We saw a lot of touchdowns in overtime, 2-point conversions, as Alabama got that crazy 24-22 win over the Auburn Tigers. So we'll listen back to all of our radio highlights coming up from the Iron Bowl. Then we'll have Coach's Checklist from Monday, as head coach Nick Saban met with the media yesterday to kind of look back for a moment at the Auburn game, but also spent a lot of time preparing for what's coming up this Saturday against the Georgia Bulldogs. Then we'll have a Writers Row conversation with Katie Windham of SI and BamaCentral, as she covers Alabama football and men's basketball. So a lot of talk about the Iron Bowl plus what's ahead for the SEC Championship game. And then speaking of the SEC Championship game, Scott Howard is the voice of the Georgia Bulldogs. He joins us for the other booth, giving us a really detailed scouting report on Georgia heading into this SEC Championship game between the Crimson Tide and the Georgia Bulldogs. With the football team, of course, the 4-overtime win against the Auburn Tigers. First time the Iron Bowl has ever gone to overtime in the 86 times it has been played. Took 4 overtimes as Alabama got the win. Will Anderson Jr. leading the way with a lot of tackles for a loss, sacks in that ball game. He's the SEC Defensive Player of the Week and possibly the SEC Defensive Player of the Year with what he's put together. Now coming up on Saturday, the SEC Championship game against Georgia. The airtime that we have for you on the network is 12 noon Central, and the kickoff will be at 3 p.m. as we're looking forward to the Crimson Tide and the Georgia Bulldogs meeting in the SEC Championship game. And Alabama has won 7 straight SEC Championship games in the Coach Saban era. That one loss was back in 2008 to Florida, but since then, a lot of great moments, including wins over Georgia in 2018 as well as in 2012. So we're hoping for another great week for the Crimson Tide football team coming up this Saturday in the SEC Championship game. Let's take a look at some basketball headlines first for the women's team, as Alabama got to spend a lot of time at home during Thanksgiving. So many times teams go on the road for Thanksgiving tournaments, but Christy Curry wanted her group to stay in Tuscaloosa, and they did, getting 3 wins against Mercer, Western Carolina, and Bethune-Cookman. All great performances for Alabama in those games, as the Crimson Tide are 5-2, and at Coleman this year, they have been 5-1, had that narrow loss early in the year against Tulane, but since then, playing some really great basketball. Now tonight, they're home against the Memphis Tigers at 6 p.m. on SEC Network Plus, as well as here on the network with our radio coverage starting at 5:55 for Alabama against Memphis. And then this time at home will continue, even coming up through Friday night, as Alabama will be at home against Houston. So the Cougars and the Tide coming up at 6 p.m. I know it can get a little confusing. The women's team's playing Houston and Memphis. The men's team right around the corner with those teams too. But this week, remember, at home in Tuscaloosa, tonight against Memphis, and coming up on Friday against Houston. Speaking of the men's basketball team, Nate Oates and his crew had a really busy time down in Orlando at the ESPN Events Invitational. Suffered its first loss of the year close to Iona, 72-68 on Thanksgiving Day, but really bounced back well. Defeated Drake 80-71 and then defeated Miami 96-64, as the Crimson Tide had a tough time shooting the basketball, not only at the free throw line throughout all of the tournament it seemed like, but also from three-point land until the second half of the Miami game, hitting three-pointer after three-pointer. There was one stretch where Alabama hit 11 shots in a row. This basketball team really played well, especially last time out against Miami. And don't discount the Drake victory as well, because Drake is picked to win the Missouri Valley Conference, and the team Alabama lost to, Iona, picked to win its conference. So even though the Crimson Tide had that defeat, still playing really good basketball. The Associated Press and the coaches still have Alabama ranked 16th in the country, sliding down just a little bit after being ranked 9th and 10th in the polls, but still at number 16 nationwide. nationwide. Now coming up on Saturday, we're going to Seattle, Alabama against Gonzaga in the Battle for Seattle. You know about the new hockey team, the Seattle Kraken. We're playing at their home coming up on Saturday when Alabama takes on Gonzaga. 7 p.m. Central start time. Our radio coverage will start at 6 o'clock, pretty much right as the football game against Georgia ends. The men's basketball game will start against Gonzaga, so we're hoping for a very busy and hopefully a very successful Saturday coming up for Crimson Tide Athletics. That's what last Saturday was, as Alabama won the Iron Bowl, 4 dramatic overtimes. And speaking of dramatic, we had a lot of dramatic moments on the radio for that game. Let's listen back to all the highlights as Eli Gold, John Parker Wilson, Rashad Johnson, and Chris Stewart give you all the big moments from the win for the Crimson Tide in the Iron Bowl this past Saturday.
On the Crimson Tide Sports Network, from Learfield, Alabama, Auburn.
Bama going left to right. Bryce gets the snap, knee high, looks, throws the fade route, near side end zone, got it, caught, touchdown Alabama! Caught by Ja'Cory Brooks in the end zone. Gets the snap, looks, throws, wide open, touchdown Alabama in overtime. Slade Bolden. Bryce in the shotgun. Gets the snap, backpedals, looks left, throws, touchdown! 2-point conversion, and Alabama wins. John Mechie on the grab. John Mechie on the grab. And Alabama has come from nowhere to defeat the Auburn Tigers in multiple overtimes. 4 overtimes, and John Mechie is the hero with help from many others. 24-22, the Crimson Tide wins the Iron Bowl of 2021.
Roll Tide.
The highlights of a great win in the Iron Bowl. 4 overtimes, Alabama gets it done. 24-22 as the Crimson Tide close out the regular season, going 11-1 overall, 7-1 in the SEC, and now Alabama getting ready for Saturday's SEC championship game against Georgia. As we start to get ready for the Bulldogs, head coach Nick Saban had his weekly Monday press conference as he started to look back a little bit at the Auburn game, but mostly look forward to what's coming up on Saturday against Georgia in Atlanta. Here's Coach's checklist from Monday.
Well, we showed a lot of grit, determination, resiliency, whatever you want to call it, in the last game, and you got to give our players a lot of credit for that. Showed great competitive character and being able to come back in the game. We had to overcome a lot of adversity, some of which we created for ourselves, some they created. Obviously, the things that we created, we need to correct so that maybe we don't have, some of those issues, in the future. It's nice to see Will Anderson be the SEC Player of the Week again. I think, this is a great opportunity for our team to be in the SEC championship game. They worked hard all year for it. They're going to play a great team in Georgia. Georgia's the #1 team in the country. They've been the most consistent team, all year long in terms of how they've sustained their performance and played at a high level, dominated the competition just about every game that they've played. I think that's, a reflection of Kirby. He's done a great job. They have, a mature team that plays with a lot of competitive character, and they're the #1 defense in the country. They've got a lot of good players on defense. They've had a lot of create a lot of negative plays, sack, pressure the quarterback, tackles for loss, and their offense has been very, very efficient. They're scoring 40 points a game. Quarterback's played outstanding football for them. He's one of the leading pass efficiency guys, in the country. They're able to run the ball with great balance. They've got 2 great running backs that both contribute equally. And, they got really good skilled players outside. 19 is really a good tight end. He's actually the leading receiver on the team, and a very athletic guy who creates a lot of mismatch issues for you in the passing game. They're very good on special teams. This is a complete team, and it'll be a tremendous challenge for our players to, play well. That's obviously the goal, and we got to have the right mindset and good preparation, all week long to be able to do that. So I think we got to play more physical. I think we got to be more aggressive in terms of, how we come out of our hips, play with power, whatever it is. We got to try to dictate, when we're in the run game and get moving. We did a better job of that in the second half. And we got to give our players, a good chance with some advantage runs when we do try to run the ball. So pass protection was an issue at times, but, we just got to do a better job of, staying square. Quarterback's got to do a good job in the pocket so that, the O-line knows where he's going to be. So there's a lot of things that, we need to work on when it comes to pressures. We got to have a good plan for how we block them, and there's a lot of things that I think we're capable of improving, and I have a lot of confidence that the players will go about it the right way to try to get that done this week. We have to coach the players that we have, and we got to get them ready to play the game. There's nothing else we can do about that. Injuries are a part of the game. You don't ever like to see any player, not be able to compete, especially when they've had a great year all year long and probably want to play in this game because of that. But we, as a coach, you just have to coach the players and try to get the players ready that you have available to play in the game, and have confidence in them and try to do the things that they can do well to help the team.
And that was Coach Saban with Coach's Checklist from Monday. He'll be meeting with the media again coming up on Wednesday, and we'll have that Coach's Checklist coming up for you on our Thursday edition of Crimson Drive, driven by Tuscaloosa Toyota. There was so much to talk about after the Iron Bowl, of course, a dramatic win for the Crimson Tide down on the Plains. First victory at Auburn since 2015. Now the Tide, of course, getting ready for the SEC Championship game, so it's time for Riders Row. And Katie Windham of Sports Illustrated and BamaCentral has been covering this team all season long, also covers Alabama men's basketball, among gymnastics, softball coverage she provides for BamaCentral, so a perfect time to catch up with her for this week's edition of Riders Row. Katie, I think your lead for the game column or story you had from the Auburn game was perfect. Lifeless, hopeless, bleak. That's what it looked like for a lot of the Iron Bowl, but how was that game from your perspective?
Yeah, it was insane up in the press box on Saturday. Someone asked me, what was it like right when the game ended? And I was like, well, when it ended, everyone had to work because it had been so strung out that no one knew what was going to happen. But I'd say the biggest reaction of anything in the press box, because, Roger, there's no cheering in the press box. It's supposed to be neutral. But when Alabama scored that last touchdown in regulation, or the only touchdown in regulation for them, there was an audible, wow, oh my gosh, just all throughout the press box, because Alabama had looked so lifeless throughout that whole game until that last drive, really. And I mean, there were some drives in the fourth quarter where they finally got it moving a little bit, but until that touchdown drive, things were just not looking great. And then obviously the overtimes, the new overtime rules, everyone got a taste of that if you didn't already know about it. And Alabama was able to come away with the very important Iron Bowl win.
Speaking of writing in the press box, I'm sure a lot of gas because a lot of people probably had game stories already written about Auburn winning, 10-3, Alabama, one of the worst days possible. Did you have a pretty long story that you had to delete pretty immediately?
Well, I had parts of it written, but most of the stuff in the first half I could keep because, that didn't change how bad the offense had looked in the first half. But really a lot of it, I just didn't, I hadn't even written because you just didn't know what was going to happen, especially, Alabama gets the one interception, which sets up the field goal. They have the other interception. So you think, oh, this might be it, but it's, called back for the roughing the passer on Dallas Turner. And so there were times where it looked like that was the thing about the game is the defense was playing so well the whole time. It was probably their best game of the year that it's like Alabama just needs one break to get back into this. If the defense scores, they're right back into it. They're only down 10. So, but I'm sure there was lots of people that, especially more on the Auburn side, that had stuff pre-written, victory headlines that had to scratch that with 24 seconds left when Ja'Cory Brooks caught that touchdown.
I bet so. That would be interesting to see all of those one day down the road. But obviously, everybody's got to scramble and get it ready for what actually happened. And that was the Crimson Tide comeback win. Just what you see from this Alabama offense, able to make adjustments after things just weren't going so well for most of the ball game.
Yeah, I mean, I think the biggest adjustment, obviously, which Saban talked about after the game, was the offensive line. They kind of changed things up in the second half. In the first half, you had Darian Dalcourt at center, and Damian George at right tackle. In the second half, you had Seth McLaughlin at center and Chris Owens at right tackle, the 6-year senior. And that seemed to help a lot because in the first half, Bryce Young had no time to throw. Damian George was constantly getting beat on the right side, whether in pass protection or run blocking. And so the offense just couldn't really get anything going. I texted someone at one point during the game and I was like, it seems like a big deal when Alabama even gets a positive play, like not even first down, but just positive yardage because there was so much negativity in the first half. But I think the change along the offensive line was big in the second half, helped them move things a little better. And then we just saw again the poise from Bryce Young that he's had all year, that when the team's facing adversity, as a young guy, obviously he's pretty experienced now, 12 games into the year, but he still has the poise to lead his team on that type of drive. You know, to even begin that drive, he had the 3rd and 10 conversion from his own end zone, had the 4th down conversion to Jaleel Billingsley farther down on the drive, and then obviously the touchdown pass to Brooks. And so another big thing was, you know, Alabama was without Brian Robinson for a lot of that fourth quarter. So you saw Trey Sanders getting a little more time, which could potentially be a big storyline heading into Atlanta if Brian Robinson isn't ready to go.
Yeah, I was going to ask you about that. How healthy is this Alabama team, especially with the Brian Robinson news that we've heard?
Yeah, it's yesterday Saban was asked if he's ever been in this situation where he only had one healthy running back and how that impacts the team. And he was like, to answer your first part of the question, no. I mean, it is pretty unprecedented that this one position group has been decimated so bad. It's kind of like a couple years ago at middle linebacker with Alabama when Christian Harris and Shane Lee had to play a lot as true freshmen. But running back, you know, is a tough position. And if Brian Robinson can't go, which Saban he didn't say explicitly, but he made it seem like yesterday, there's a good chance he won't play, then that could be a big problem for the offense, only having one healthy running back. You know, they've worked other guys at that position throughout the year, Christian Leary and DeMoy Kennedy. But those are guys that have really not taken any snaps at the collegiate level at that position. But we'll see how that turns out. Otherwise, health-wise, it seems like people are kind of more on the mend. Jalen Armour-Davis didn't play at all in the Iron Bowl. I think Saban said it was a hip injury, so we'll see. But a lot of people in the secondary played well without him there. So Alabama's pretty deep at that position. Drew Sanders, you know, has been dealing with a hand injury, but he played a little bit in the Iron Bowl, mainly on special teams. But Dallas Turner, the freshman, played good in that position as well. So I think the biggest area of concern is obviously running back. At this point in the season, there's going to be a lot of nicks and bruises and muscle strains, things like that, just weariness on the body. But I know this is the game that guys want to be able to play in.
Certainly, as Alabama gets ready to play Georgia in the SEC championship game. And this Crimson Tide football team has been so up and down throughout the season. You can even look to the Iron Bowl. There are a lot of downs and then up at the very end. Just so where do you feel like this team is in terms of morale and their attention to detail that's going to be needed on the practice field this week to get ready for Georgia?
I feel like the morale with this team is really good. And I feel like it was really good last week, too. At least it seemed like it the times we got to talk to them throughout the week. It's hard to tell sometimes over Zoom, but they at least seemed fired up, and then it seemed like they were kind of flat in the first half, at least offensively against Auburn. So it's been really hard for me to figure things out for this team. But at the end of the day, this is still Alabama. You know, they are going to be one of the most talented teams in the country. Whether they've played like that so far this year, it hasn't always been that way. They've really only put together one complete 60-minute performance against Mississippi State. But they have the capability to do that. And you would think, you know, with the SEC title on the line, with the playoff spot on the line, this team would be able to get up for this game, and I think they will. Obviously, they're facing a really good, talented Georgia team. I was just looking at some of Georgia's stats before I got on here, and a lot of their starters' stats are nowhere comparable to Alabama because their starters have been able to be pulled so early in the game because they've been able to blow such big leads or get such big leads in games. But also the East has not been as challenging as the West this year. So there's been a lot made so far early in the media between Alabama and Georgia about Alabama being battle tested. Is that an advantage? I think that's something we'll have to see on Saturday.
And we've really been looking forward to this matchup all season long. And Georgia, it seems like to me at least, is kind of a position Alabama's been in the last few years where you go through a regular season a little bit unchallenged. And now here comes a really big game versus an Alabama team that has been battle tested. Just how do you feel like maybe some of these close games, even the Texas A&M loss, could help Alabama if this game does get close late?
Yeah, they've for sure experienced adversity, and somebody asked Kirby Smart about that on the teleconference, and he's like, "We faced adversity. We faced it at practice." And I'm like, that's a little different than a game. And not to say that you have to face adversity to be able to win games, but I think this game on Saturday will be close. And so Georgia really has not been in that situation this year since maybe the first week against Clemson, and that I believe 10-3 game, which really necessarily wasn't even that close, which was kind of a defensive slugfest. But yeah, Alabama has proven that they can come back. Saban has said, he said after the game and since, we don't want to put ourselves into that position where we're always having to come back. He was saying a lot of it is the mistakes that they make themselves, but they've proven that they can come back if they need to. And we've seen the last two times Alabama and Georgia have played in the SEC title in 2012 and 2018. Those have been two of the closest played games really in the Saban era. The most head-to-head games that the games have gone. And so I think it'll be that way on Saturday. And so in that area, Alabama definitely has an advantage over Georgia that they played in those types of games multiple times.
Yeah, the end of the 2012 game is still one of my all-time favorites, and Georgia fans hate hearing me say that. But as we keep getting ready for Saturday, what else are you and the BamaCentral team kind of working on? Some other storylines you're following with the Crimson Tide football team?
Yeah, so we're kind of looking at, the both teams, both Georgia and Alabama, have really big defensive stars that have made headlines that are kind of in the Heisman race. This year the Heisman's pretty wide open. Bryce Young's kind of the favorite, but it's not as clear cut as it is in some years. But Georgia has Jordan Davis, the massive, defensive lineman, who Saban said is one of the best he's seen all year. Then Alabama has Will Anderson, who Saban said has made the most impact for his program than any player has maybe ever, which is a pretty big compliment for Anderson when you think about all the guys Saban's put in the NFL, first team All-Americans, things like that. And so that's something we'll kind of be looking at. We'll be looking at, Georgia's defense has been extremely good this year. I think they're only giving up 6.9 points per game, but they've only faced one top 25 scoring offense, and that was in Tennessee. And that's who they gave up the most points to in 17. So Alabama's going to be by far the best offense that Georgia's faced this year, even though they may not have looked it on Saturday. But you think just 2 games ago, they had almost 700 yards against Arkansas. So this team can put up a lot of yards and points. So kind of looking at the matchup between the Alabama offense and the Georgia defense. And then also this week, it's a big week for basketball. They got the Gonzaga game on Saturday, so we'll be providing coverage of that too. Women's basketball's got some games. So all the sports are really kicking up in Tuscaloosa, the winter sports here.
Yeah, I know you've been covering the men's basketball team a little bit. What were your takeaways from the week that Alabama had in Orlando?
Yeah, I think talking to Nate after the final game where they kind of really pulled away from Miami in the second half, went on a big run, asking him what the team, how they matured. And I think he said after the Iona game, if we do make more of our free throws, then we might not have learned the lessons we needed to. Obviously, Alabama did not have a good free throw shooting day at all. I think it was 13 of 25, which is not what you want to see. But he's like, if we make a few more and win, then this team might not have learned the lessons they needed to. I think it's kind of what we were talking about with football. Now they've been battle tested. They've had a loss. They came back and won the next 2 games. Didn't look great in the first half against Drake, but came back and won. Kind of started Miami out slow and then really pulled away. And I think it was good for the team to have that kind of win, have some good shooting. Because really the first 2 games, I think both they shot below 23 pointers, which is really not their style. Got more into it in game 3 against Miami. We saw Keon Ellis have a really good shooting game. We're really starting to see the freshman J.D. Davison come into his own. He was a couple rebounds short of a triple-double, and Nate Oates joked that Keon Ellis was stealing his rebounds. So that's the only reason he didn't get it. But if J.D. Davison can continue clicking, driving to the basket with confidence, which opens up passing lanes for other people, and he can have another, more double-digit assist games, then I think things are really going to improve for this basketball team, which they're already in a good position. Dropped a little bit in the polls with the loss, but they're in a good position right now, which they're facing a really tough stretch coming up too, obviously with Gonzaga, Houston, and Memphis.
Well, last week, a really memorable week as Alabama wins the Iron Bowl in a crazy game down at Auburn, and men's basketball finished the week strong. But all of us started the week with heavy hearts with last Tuesday's news that Cecil Hurt, longtime sports editor and columnist for the Tuscaloosa News, passed away. And he was a good friend to all of us within Alabama athletics, especially in the media. And I know you had a chance to get to know him. Just how helpful was he early in your journalism career?
Yeah, it was awesome seeing all the outpouring of love and support and stories after he passed, just what he meant to people. My senior year of college, I was an intern at T News, and he always, was helpful. He helped me land my next gig kind of stream with the AP. I was talking with some other journalists that, when he followed you on Twitter, when you get that notification that Cecil Hurt followed you, it just means so much. And he didn't have to do that. He's the most respected person in Alabama journalism. He didn't have to follow a bunch of interns, but he did because he knew how much that would mean to them. He was always complimentary. He always, helped out on press row. Some people can tend to be, especially you would think if you have over 100,000 followers like he did, you could be a little arrogant, better than everyone else, no need to talk to anyone else, but he always would. Always had a kind word. Always enjoyed speaking to him in the press box. And as everyone pointed out, he was super smart. Loved to read his stuff, grew up reading his stuff, and he'll definitely be missed covering Alabama athletics.
Very well said. Well, Katie Windham, you do a great job right now covering Crimson Tide athletics for BamaCentral and Sports Illustrated. Just thank you for joining us for the second time this year here on Crimson Drive, and I look forward to reading more of your work. Thank you again.
Thanks for having me on, Roger.
Enjoyed that conversation with Katie Windham of Sports Illustrated and BamaCentral as Alabama gets ready to play Georgia coming up in the SEC championship game. So we had the writer's perspective from Katie. Now let's get the Georgia perspective from the voice of the Georgia for the last 14 years. He's been part of the broadcast team for over 30 years for the Georgia Bulldogs, and he is Scott Howard as he joined us earlier today to give us a full scouting report on Georgia. It's time for The Other Booth. Scott, here we are, a matchup we've kind of been hoping for all season long. Now it's finally here. I'm sure you guys are excited for the Tide and the Georgia Bulldogs on Saturday.
Yeah, it's probably the best matchup that you could hope for, certainly in this conference. And, Georgia's played as well as anybody all season long, and Alabama's been right there as well, with only the one loss. But these are definitely the two best teams in the Southeastern Conference, and it's great to see them playing it out for the championship.
Of course, Georgia had high expectations coming into this season, starting with the Clemson game, but Georgia gets that victory. And just take us through the journey through this season in 2021 for the Bulldogs.
Well, since that game, I mean, that's really the only close ball game that Georgia has played this season. That was a 7-point game, 10-3. Clemson didn't score a touchdown. And then after that, it was, Georgia has just run off. Let me run down the schedule here. UAB 56-7, South Carolina 40-13, Vanderbilt 62-0, Arkansas 37-0, Auburn 34-10. It just went on and on and on. And Georgia has beaten their opponents all season long by, 17, 20, 25 points or more on a consistent basis, including the last game at Georgia Tech last week, 45-0. So we've seen this team dominate early in ball games, and kind of have their way with how they wanted it to end in the second half. And get a lot of players in the ball game. Usually in the fourth quarter, there's a lot of guys deep in the roster that have gotten a lot of snaps. So, which is good. That's good for the experience. That's good for the morale of the team, certainly. And those are the guys that are going to be playing in the future. So it's great to get them that in-game experience. But it's been an amazing ride for Georgia really this year because of the way they've been able to win ball games and really dominate their opponent.
Ranks number one in the country, 12-0 throughout the regular season, and at the helm for most of this season has been Stetson Bennett IV. What has he done well at quarterback? How is he different than maybe when we saw him in Tuscaloosa a year ago?
Probably just experience-wise. Another year to grow, another year to learn, another year to study. He watches a lot of film. He's a regular around the athletic department when they're not on the field practicing. He's doing his work as the quarterback. He's studying trends and what he needs to do with the offensive coordinator Todd Monken and Stetson he's just a calm force in the offensive backfield and on the team in general. He doesn't really get too high and too emotional. He just goes about his business. He's not the prototypical quarterback with the throwing the ball 70 5 yards in the air downfield. He can get the job done with his passing. His big thing has been his ability to run the football and give that position a different look, which traditionally JT Daniels is not a running guy. He's more of a stand in the pocket and deliver the football. And Stetson gives you some more options. You're able to move the pocket with him, rollouts, and bootlegs, and he can run it or he can throw on the run, and he's very good when he has those options. So he's a smart guy. He's had a lot of snaps in his career. He's a veteran, so he's really done a nice job. But he's got a great supporting cast too, and you can't leave out the players around him that help make him look good as he helps make them look good.
Yeah, tell us a little more about those guys, the running back room, wide receivers. I mean, just talent across the board in this Georgia offense.
Yeah, there's a lot of depth there in the backfield with Zamir White, who is, I think he's still the leading rusher. I didn't check the stats just yet, but it was very tight between Zamir White and James Cook. And then Kenny McIntosh had a nice game in the win over Georgia Tech last week. And Dejon Edwards has played well when he comes in the ball game. Kendall Milton's been hurt, his status remains to be seen for the championship game. But those are the 5 scholarship guys, and Georgia uses them frequently. I was just watching some of the Tech game earlier this week on the replay, and there was one series where Zamir White was in for 2 plays, and then James Cook came in for 2 plays, and then Kenny McIntosh came in for 2 plays, and Georgia ended up scoring a touchdown on a long run on that series with Kenny McIntosh, I believe was the right series that I'm thinking about. But it's just constant fresh legs in the ball game, and all of those guys are good with that, which is great. I mean, their health has remained good for the most part. With Kendall Milton's obviously out with an injury, but Zamir White has been healthy most of the season, as has James Cook. Kenny McIntosh had some injuries early on, but he's back and ready to go. It's a good group. They all like to share the football, and it's great just to keep those guys fresh, and that's certainly an advantage for the offense. The offensive line has had some early injuries, and they had to shuffle some guys around. We lost our right guard the first game of the year. So we had to move our center to right guard and start a redshirt freshman at center. And then we've had some injuries at left tackle with Jamari Salyer being out the last few games. But Broderick Jones has come in and done a really nice job at left tackle. The tight ends have been outstanding. Brock Bowers, that guy's an All-American candidate. Darnell Washington had early injuries. He's a huge target, 6'7", and about 265 at tight end. He's working his way back into more and more snaps and health-wise. And John Fitzpatrick is another tight end that's very good. And then the receivers, we've gone through a lot of injuries with receivers. But the guys that have played have certainly contributed very well. So there's been a lot of luck. You have to be a little bit lucky in this game too when you're good, and to win championships, you have to have that right combination of luck and skill and experience and all of that stuff. And so far, Georgia's gotten all of that through the first 12 games.
Georgia's so good on offense. So much of the discussion as well as on the Georgia defense, and especially Jordan Davis. I mean, what a special season he's put together. Has he been one of the more disruptive players you've seen wear a Georgia uniform?
Yeah, he's terrific. I mean, he's a personality guy off the field too. Just a pleasure to be around, and those guys are fun. He's happy. He's always smiling. He's laughing and cutting up, and you like to be around those guys. So do your teammates. And his ability on the field is lights out. I mean, a lot of time he gets lost in the shuffle just because of the position he plays. He's covered up in that interior line of scrimmage, so you don't see him a lot until he comes out of the pile and makes a tackle down the line of scrimmage, or gets a sack, or he's taking on 2 and 3 blockers at a time and allowing others to make the stops. And but he gets his fair share. He's such a huge force in there 6'6", and anywhere from 340 to 350, whatever he weighs on a specific day. But yeah, he's very disruptive in that line of scrimmage. Georgia's certainly going to miss him when he's moved on to the next level, and that's a hard body to replace just because he is so large, and he's so skilled too. He's very fast. He's got quickness. He's one of the better defensive players that I've seen in my time at Georgia.
And then looking at this game on Saturday, where does Georgia match up best with Alabama, in your opinion?
Yeah, that's a good question. Probably, I don't know, maybe just across the board. I mean, I don't know that, Alabama's, they've got great players too. Maybe defensively, Georgia might have a little bit of an edge over Alabama's play this year. I don't know how much. Certainly the standout linebacker that Alabama has in Anderson. He's had an amazing year. I think it's a pretty even matchup across the board. I don't know. I haven't taken the time to break it down position by position, and Alabama's receivers are probably a little more experienced and maybe a little more skilled than Georgia, but maybe Georgia's depth in the running back position is a little stronger. Obviously, quarterback Bryce Young is getting a heck of a lot more headlines than Stetson Bennett would, but you could probably break it down position by position and give each side an advantage there where it would all even out in the end when you did that.
And then last question, Kirby Smart, of course, has spent a lot of time here in Tuscaloosa and continues developing as a head coach. Just how have you seen him mature throughout the years as he continues growing into this position, and obviously has a very strong team this year? He has had in the past, but he's kept this Georgia machine moving forward. I'm sure that's impressive to see.
Yeah, it really is. I mean, he had I'm sure when he got the job here, he had a formula in mind. And the things that he had learned at Alabama and all his other stops, his coaching stops, before he became a head coach. But he's been able to implement all of those different ideas that he had. He looks at it more as an organization, and he's the CEO of the organization. So it's kind of operated, like a business in many ways. Just the way things are handled. There's a lot of staff, so there's a lot of people to do a lot of, I don't want to say the smaller things, but things that the head coach necessarily doesn't need to concern himself with. So he's got great support, and when you're talking on the field, I mean, my goodness, they practice hard. They make practice hard on purpose. They make it challenging. They put these guys through adversity in practice so that when you get to the game, the game is supposed to be easy compared to what they've gone through during the week. But he's assembled a good staff. They recruit tremendously. He had all the ideas when he got the job, and he's the guy everybody listens to now in the football program because he knows what he's doing, and he's had the success to back that up since that. After the first year, they really kicked it up a notch, and the last 5 years of his tenure here have really been good. And the one thing that they're still seeking is that national championship.
Well, it's Alabama coming up against Georgia on Saturday in Atlanta for the SEC championship game. Who knows? Maybe the first of two meetings we see this year between Crimson Tide and the Bulldogs. But Scott, we've really enjoyed hearing from you and getting a breakdown on the Bulldogs. Looking forward to a great game. Just thank you for your time.
You bet, Roger. Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
Fun to visit with Scott Howard before the SEC championship game, Alabama against Georgia, coming up on Saturday. Certainly, we're keeping our eyes forward towards that. But here on the network, we have a really busy week, including some games coming up tonight. So let's go ahead and take a look at the schedule that's ahead here on the Crimson Tide Sports Network. As I mentioned tonight, we will have women's basketball, the Alabama Crimson Tide against the Memphis Tigers. Our radio airtime will be 5:55 p.m. for that 6 p.m. tip inside Coleman Coliseum. Also coming up on Thursday, we'll have our SEC Championship game preview show at 6:30. Don't forget, on Thursday afternoon as well, we'll have Crimson Drive driven by Tuscaloosa Toyota at 2 p.m. right back here on our Facebook page. And then on Friday, it'll be the women's basketball team home once again against the Houston Cougars. 6 p.m. tip-off from Coleman Coliseum. Radio airtime will be at 5:55 for that game. Saturday will be extremely busy. First of all, football against Georgia in the SEC Championship game. Airtime will be at noon Central, kickoff at 3 p.m. Central. Then the men's basketball game against Gonzaga from Seattle will tip-off probably, at 7 p.m., and we will have our radio coverage kickoff, we'll say, on the radio at 6 p.m. coming up. So a very busy Saturday, and of course we will have more coming up this week as well on Crimson Drive, driven by Tuscaloosa Toyota. But that is going to wrap up this Tuesday edition of the show. Got to say a big thank you to Scott Howard of Georgia for joining us, as well as Katie Windham of Sports Illustrated and BamaCentral. Thanks as well to our producer Ethan Carabin for putting it all together. This has been Roger Hoover saying thank you for watching Crimson Drive, driven by Tuscaloosa Toyota. Make sure you check them out at TuscaloosaToyota.com, and we will see you right back here Thursday afternoon, 2 o'clock, for another edition of Crimson Drive, driven by Tuscaloosa Toyota. Until then, so long, roll Tide.